My name's Colin Marshall. This is the Marketplace of Ideas. Peter Sagal is best known as the host of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, the NPR News quiz, but he's also written the book on swinging, eating, strip clubs, lying, gambling, consumption, and pornography. It's called The Book of Vice, Very Naughty Things, and How to Do Them. Peter, welcome to the program.
My pleasure. Great to be here with you.
Now, you've gone on record as saying you didn't want to write the obvious project based on your day job, which would be something like Peter Sagal's Book of Wacky Headlines. What made that project so unappealing to you?
Well, I guess it was a number of things. First of all, it's what I do all week. And if you're eating chocolate all day, eventually you want some prime rib. Is that a good metaphor to use here? I don't know. And partially, it's just what people would expect of me. Aha, that's just what they were expecting. And I for some reason, I didn't just want to do that. I wanted to do something that would be a little surprising. And I realized afterwards, I think I also wanted to be a little shocking. I've been interviewed by a whole bunch of public radio stations, and they're all like, well, this is an interesting topic for your book, sir. You know, as if I've horrified them by departing from the public radio fold so much. But that's a fun thing to do.
How much did you want to initially rebel against your own image as the host of the NPR News quiz? Was that consciously in your mind?
Oh, a fair amount. I mean, I think it was partially because a friend of mine was walking around one day saying to me, wow, you're a game show host. Gosh, I never thought I'd know a game show host. But there you are, a game show host. And I'm like, no, I'm much more than that. I used to know years ago, Philip Barry Jr., the son of Philip Barry, the great American playwright of the 30s, the guy who wrote the Philadelphia Story and many other plays. And according to Philip Barry Jr., his father, who was the great comic playwright of his era, used to complain, saying, nobody takes my dramas seriously. They just want me for my comedies. And I think everybody has a little bit of Philip Barry in them, and that I wanted to be known for something else other than making fun of people in the news.
What part of your identity was getting smothered then as being known primarily as the host of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me?
I think you and I are on sort of a rising spiral of self-importance here that I need to put the kibosh on. No part of me was being smothered.
Okay.
But at the same time, I mean, I do more things than merely make fun of things in 15-second sound bites. And I should say that I have a fair amount of curiosity about how other people live. I've done some journalism in my past. One of the great things about my job is that I get to talk to people who live different lives than I do. And this, to a certain extent, was really just an extension of that. I just wanted to talk to people who live differently than I do and experience things differently than I do. And the fact that the central organizing factor was vice, misbehavior, indulgence, probably speaks to the fact that I don't indulge myself much or have very few vices. And thus, that was sort of an area that's really exciting to me. I mean, there was this interesting article in the Sunday New York Times that came out after the Eliot Spitzer scandal broke, and the following other revelations about what his successor as governor of New York, David Paterson, had done. And the author of the article, Frank Pruitt, is like, what are these people doing? What's going on? And he wrote about how some of these stories of high-priced call girls and various other kinds of sexual indiscretions were making him and his friends wonder what was wrong with them, that they didn't have sort of any amazing scandals or secrets for anybody to find out. And I actually wrote to Bruni, and I sent him a copy of the book, and think that's exactly why I wrote this book. What's going on out there? And why aren't I doing this? And should I be doing this? And so on and so forth.
You said, I'm famous in a certain way. I'm famous among, NPR listeners and those who know NPR listeners, and which is probably a better way to be famous than like Michael Jackson, I assume.
There's a way to do a lot of things better than Michael Jackson. Yes, I have often felt that public radio fame is, in fact, the best kind of fame to have. Because, A, you're in the radio, so nobody knows what you look like, so you can walk down the street unmolested. And the people who don't know who you the people who do know who you are tend to be really nice and well-behaved and highly educated and cool. I don't know what Michael Jackson's fans do to him, and frankly, I don't want to know. I have a fan out in Southern California who every now and then sends me bottles of Zinfandel.
Awesome.
I mean, hey, Northern California.
You can't ask for more than that. Now, you look at yourself with this fame, and were you thinking, well, I guess I've managed to avoid being embroiled in all these high-profile scandals I see around me. You were trying to decide if that was a good or a bad thing?
Well, what's funny is I was on Talk of the Nation, and they said to me, "Do you think that this scandal, Elliot Spitzer, will inspire more people to seek out prostitutes?" And weirdly, I think it will, even though his whole thing, his whole career and life collapsed around him because he did that. I was at a swingers club, as is mentioned in the book, and a couple I met there, a couple of high school teachers, and they said that they had found their way into this because they had read about a couple of high school teachers in another state who had been fired because they had been discovered attending events like this. And this weirdly inspired them to go seek it out. And I think that's very common. I think that there's a certain envy that is applied even to these stories. I mean, just look at the fascination with a young woman who Spitzer was dallying with, if that's the right word. People were like, "Oh my gosh, she was beautiful, she was young." She was like, "Wow, what was that like?" Yeah, I bet phones be ringing off the hook at various escort agencies.
So you're telling me that these people are seeing high-profile falls from grace on the cover of the Wall Street Journal or what have you, on CNN, and they think to themselves, "Man, one day..."
I think different people think different things, and I think some people think two things. I think some people, I bet a lot of the people who tutted him and said, "Oh, what a shame, what a scandal," they then closed their mouths and thought about the various shameful and scandal things that they had done, how much they had enjoyed them, and perhaps how much they would like to start doing even more elaborate, shameful, and scandalous things if they could get away with it. I think it's just the nature of. I think that a lot of these stories that should be, what's the word? There's a phrase there that I can't quite find. Cautionary tales are not, because what they do is they reveal to all of us all this other stuff out there.
In the process of writing this book, I don't know how much you had to pitch it or anything like that, but in your mind, was an angle, or maybe the angle, this sort of NPR guy among the libertines kind of thing, kind of a fish out of water?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would have been dishonest of me to pitch it as anything else. I mean, because, I even said this explicitly. I am in no way equipped, qualified, to write the kind of, hey, tell-all novel. And in fact, nonfiction. And in fact, those books kind of bother me. I've read a bunch of them mainly for work. Like I once put together a quiz on Motley Crue's group autobiography, which was an inspiration in many ways to me. And those books are so tiresome because they either brag, then I had sex with this groupie, and whoa, the drugs I did, and what went up my nose, or there's this false, wow, man, I had a tremendous amount of fun, but now I'm better, And there's this weird kind of bragging covered with shame, and it doesn't seem like the truth. I thought, and also, there's this sense of externality. Like you poor reader, you have to spend $16.95 to buy the hardcover of my book, or $26.95, so you can experience the life that I lived as a rock star. And I thought it'd be interesting, at least, to add to that mix anyway, a book written by somebody who's just as boring as you are. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Dan Savage, for example. And he wrote a book like this, which I pointedly did not read because I thought it would be so excellent that I would then have to put down my own plans because I could never come close to it. But he wrote a book about this sort of thing called Skipping Toward Gomorrah, about the 7 vices or the 12 deadly sins or whatever they are in American life. And even Dan Savage, who was like this tremendously kind and good-hearted man, when you listen to him talk to people about sex and sexuality, you realize that he is, as a completely out and somewhat loudly living gay guy, he's done and seen things from his perspective that simply aren't yours. And he'll talk to vanilla married guys like myself, but you can tell there's a certain, almost like, why are you so dull? From his perspective, we are. Even there. So I really wanted to write an interesting book for the dull, by the dull. How's that?
You wanted to be able to talk at the same level to your audience.
I wrote with the same assumptions, that you don't know what these things are like. You've heard about them and wondered about them, and you want to know what I want to know. And thus I will go and try to answer it and try to be as amusing as possible.
I rattled off the specific vices you go over in the book at the beginning, but I wanted to ask you, I guess it's kind of a matter of what vices you can get in proximity to without getting in trouble, but the vices you picked, how did you know which ones you wanted to go after?
Well, a lot of it was prior knowledge and interest. Some of it was opportunity. For example, and as I describe in the book, I had this weird, almost involuntary involvement with the world of pornography by virtue of the job I had ghostwriting the memoirs of this woman who purported to be a major porn director back in the 70s. The reason I say purported is, and not was, is told in the book. And because of that experience, which took up about a year of my life 15 years ago, I had this bizarre knowledge of that industry, at least that industry at that time. And it was this sort of both fascinating and distressing glimpse into the thing that existed, that was out there. And of course, over the intervening 15 years, it's become more and more mainstream, so it's not so weird anymore to know what I know. But I had all this knowledge and nothing to do with it, and a lot of unanswered questions with that. Of course, I had to write a chapter on pornography. Similarly with gambling, I had gone through a personal conversion with gambling where I didn't understand why anybody would do it, to where I actually find it really kind of appealing and enjoy doing it myself from time to time. And that really interested me of how I had made that journey, and I wanted to kind of explain it. And other things as they came to me, everybody has had this fascination with, came to me, I said came to me. Everybody has this fascination with swingers clubs. That out of all the chapters in the book are the one that gets the most comment. I don't know if it's because it's the first one, it's the only one people have read. But every married person in the world, I think, imagines or at least asks, how could you do that? How could a marriage survive organized adultery in each other's company? And the answer is, for some people it works. And people are really interested in that and how it works and what the transactions are like. And, and then it was time to hand in the book. So I basically did what I could do. I wish I could have done more. I would have loved, and maybe if I ever write a sequel, would love to sort of experience all kinds of other kinds of non-sexual, in particular, indulgence in the material world and yachts, various levels of luxury. I wish I could have done a better job with that. Different kinds of sort of obsessions and hobbies and so on and so forth.
How successful would you say you were, and as you just mentioned, and as you give a lot of thought to in the book, in determining why the vice people that you encounter are into the vices that they're into, what motivates them to do what they do? Because it seems like a lot of the explanations in your book I found satisfactory. How satisfactory did you find them?
Well, I found them satisfactory only because I started with a couple of assumptions that, if you take them to be true, sort of cut off further inquiry. For example, I assume there's nothing wrong with these people. They're not damaged in any way. So by that, you take away the classic Freudian explanation. Well, the reason these people are looking for intimacy in these strange situations is because X. No, these are what they generally want to do, and that's why they're doing it. And if you just sort of assume that these are kinds of just human behavior, then it's relatively easy to sort of relate them to other kinds of human behavior that are more accessible and available to just sort of normal people who don't do it. I think one of the things that, if there is a common thread in the book, I think there is a sense of rebellion. A lot of these people are doing it and one of the things they're getting out of it is a sense of rebellion against what they perceive to be normalcy or morality. One of the things that people ask me about is, well, isn't it better in Europe where you're allowed to do all these things and nobody bothers you? Drugs are legal and prostitution is legal, and isn't it better to live there? And my response is yes. I guess if you want to do those things, you're probably better off doing it in Europe where you won't get prosecuted if you're caught. But at the same time, we have this fabulous thing here that they don't have, which is we have this Puritan ethos that we can rebel against. If you can go into a casino anywhere in Europe, just walk into one because it's no big deal. Well, that's fun if you want to gamble. But it's not the same thing as going to Vegas, the one place, the city of Cibola, city of gold, where this is, the one place where it's allowed in America, and to give you this sense of license and rebellion. I think everybody walks around with various yokes, the oxen sense of perhaps of their own devising, and wonders what it would be like to throw it off for a little while.
And there's so many vices in the book that the practice of which seem a little bit alien to me, although then again, I'm also on public radio. So
yes,
that's
who are we to talk about this?
Yeah,
the most boring people either of us know.
Surprised we're even having this conversation.
I know.
But regardless, I'm going to talk about it anyway because, as I said, I'm on public radio.
Sure.
And there's a lot that's alien to me in there, but perhaps the most alien is the chapter where you go to this restaurant, and correct me if I'm wrong about any details here, but you pay $800 for essentially a succession of cubes and sprays.
Yes.
What's the story there?
Wow, that's interesting that you like that. One of the very gratifying things that I have enjoyed about writing this book is everybody I talk to has a different favorite chapter, and that's really fun, and it's gratifying to me. It makes me think that I provided something for everybody all along the way. What that is about, and that's really the sort of thing I wish I could have done more, is to get into subcultures, particularly non-sexual ones, in a way that I was able to do in that chapter, at least glimpse them. This is the subculture of fine dining, which exists all over the world right now. They call themselves foodies. The foodies, they call themselves gourmets. They call themselves gourmands. These are the people who, will book their vacations to go to, they'll go to Provence and learn to bake bread for 2 weeks, or they will, as somebody I used to know in Connecticut, install a French bread oven in their own home at the cost of $150,000 so they could have that special crisp. Hello?
Oh, I was just whistling at the magnitude of that expense.
Okay, I didn't know. And these are people who really desperately care about food, and there's a culture there that will support it. There are professionals who do this. There was actually a fun glimpse of it in the movie Ratatouille. I mean, one of the things they did in Ratatouille was the makers of the film spent a lot of time with Thomas Keller, who's one of the foremost guys in this world in America. In fact, one of Thomas Keller's most prized protégés and most successful protégés is Grant Achatz, the guy I wrote about in the book. As a matter of fact, Grant Achatz has a son named Keller Achatz, so there's a connection. And this is a world in which food is seen as a number of things, probably the last of which is nourishment, in which it is seen as a theatrical experience, an aesthetic experience, in which there are references and cultural connections between one dish you're making. I mean, you can go in a restaurant like this and eat a dish, and there'll be references in the dish to other dishes that other chefs have made that you or may not that you may or may not know about. Probably you will if you're eating in a restaurant like this. It's so interesting that Grant's variation on the trout is so a reference, of course, to Keller's famous trout entree that he's been serving at the French. That stuff goes on, and it's far beyond my head. But what's so fun about this, and what's so great about this, is two things. First of all, is that you do get the sense that you're seeing an art form, if you accept that it's an art form, taken as far as it can go. It's like if you like music and you like theater, going to see Wagner at Bayreuth, at the Bayreuth Festival. This is as big as it gets. Like it or not, you have taken it to the ultimate level, and that's something to say. And the other thing that's great about it is, and this is also true, I think, of really great art, is it breaks down your assumptions that you don't even know you have. What food looks like, what it tastes like, how it's supposed to work. These things you never think about. You assume that they're true, and you go to a restaurant like this, particularly like this, and he's completely screwing with all of that, and it's really fun. It's a little bit like there's a famous novel by Agatha Christie called The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. She wrote it back in the 1920s. And in this novel, it turns out that the murderer is the narrator, the person who's been telling the story in the first person the whole way along. And it turns out that at one point he stopped narrating and he killed the guy, and then he continued to narrate again, and he never told you. And you read that book, and all of a sudden you're like, my God, I never realized that was possible. I never realized that the narrator of the novel could be lying to me or could have chosen not to tell me something instead of narrating it. In other words, it completely shows you your assumptions. When Grant Achatz serves you a peanut butter and jelly, which is a grape wrapped in this artisanal bread with this sort of odd peanut sauce, it changes the way you think about food and what peanut butter and jelly is. Oh, there's grape in peanut butter and jelly. And why does that taste good? And why doesn't it? And would it taste better if? Or you say to yourself, mint can be sweet, or things like that. And, it does things to your head that are kind of hard to describe. So I actually recommend it.
So part of that $800 you pay is going toward getting your mental framework of assumptions about food just kind of shoved.
Yeah, and it's really fun. And what's fun is you starting to see the world from the artist's perspective. But in order to enjoy this, you have to buy into the whole concept that this is not food, this is art, which a lot of people would find crazy, and may well be. But if you buy into that concept, it's like, I remember a friend of mine was in a grocery store once, and they said, somebody looking at the meat rack in the grocery store, wouldn't it be great if they invented another animal? It's a little bit like that. It's like this whole other thing you get to do, and it only costs you $800 for two.
I want to go ahead and connect this to another part of your work, something you mentioned on the blog, another part of your life, I guess I should say, which is running, and how you recently had the interview in a Runner's World, and that article as well about the $75,000 anti-gravity treadmill, something like that.
Yes.
I guess if I have that right, then what is that also Vice? That running gear and like the...
Oh, yeah, I think so. That's something I would have loved to write about, is just the indulgence in toys, particularly that men have. I think is a terrible vice. I mean, I touch on this in my chapter on consumption, like, in the various kinds of indulgence. But I do think that there's something about that kind of acquisitiveness and these toys, and particularly these obsessive hobby toys. I mean, I'll reference again that bread oven that one guy made, or the workshops that people build, or the collectors. There's this weird kind of strange kind of collection thing of being able to sort of completely explore or indulge yourself in one very narrow way. That's very weird. I do think, in a weird way, it's always a kind of rebellion. Again, I'll return to that, because if you're a guy, I mean, who are you? You're mild-mannered public radio host, or your mild-mannered internet banker, or whatever the hell you are. But really, you are a collector of vintage skateboards. We are known in the skateboard community. I think, in a weird way, we're all doing things through complicated means that the internet provides us in simple means. You can pretend to be somebody else. The classic line on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And I do think that people are trying to express themselves. They're trying to establish some identity outside of what everybody thinks by either acquiring things or indulging in things. I think that's a real big part of it. And one of the problems we have is that we're constantly in a battle against the demographers and the marketers who know exactly who we are and what they think we're going to do in order to be individual, so they can sell it to us in mass. I mean, to me, the great example of that are the guys who get into real Harley Davidsons. And what they do, they're 45. They're doing in the Wild Hogs movie. They're 45 years old, right? They're having their midlife crisis. They go and they buy a $20,000 motorcycle, and then in order to express their individuality, they buy $700 worth of clothing, all of which is emblazoned with a corporate logo. I mean, I find this hilarious, but there are so many other ways in which people do that, in which people. Tom Wolfe was really good at writing about this. How it's gotten to the point that in our current culture, you can never really be an individual. You can only become part of smaller and smaller marketing demographics. Instead of buying one watch, you'll buy another watch that has a smaller customer base. So therefore, you're more exclusive. But you can never actually be yourself. In order to be yourself, you have to walk away from all of it, and nobody, I think, has the courage to do that.
You can just wedge yourself into a series of niche markets.
Exactly, and you can say, who am I? I'm somebody who enjoys, this food product here. I like to shop at Whole Foods, and I like to buy my watches and my clothes from there, and I like to, I enjoy these kinds of films, and these are what makes me me, And what you find out is that, if the marketing people know exactly who you are, there are, 40,000 people just like you in your zip code, and they even have a funny name for you,
Now, since the Book of Vice has been out for a few months now, I wanted to ask about something that I was actually becoming very interested in while I was reading it, and that is what the difference was between the reactions from the NPR crowd, the ones who know you as the host, and the reactions from, I guess I'll call them, the non-NPR crowd, the ones who come at the book as just being a book about vice.
Well, that's interesting. I've had some people, most people who came to the book, sadly or not so sadly, came to it via my public radio persona, and if they like my public radio persona, they tended to like the book. The mother of one of our family's babysitters was horrified with it. She wasn't happy at all, but mostly that's true. But there have been people, because it is purported to be an amateur and novice's view of all this, those people who live in the more, shall we say, extreme ranges of lifestyle have been somewhat dismissive of it. This guy's so vanilla, he doesn't really know. Actually, somebody who's part of the population known as sex bloggers, who blogs anonymously about their sex life, critiqued the book and the swinging and its treatment of the swinging lifestyle. And I wrote in to her blog, and I said, well, I'm glad you read the book, and I really didn't mean to make any generalizations about you. It was really just my own sort of impressions. And they were so excited that Peter Sagal, had commented on their blog, so it turns out that my demographic goes further than I think. But no, I was very curious as to what the people who hosted that party, that swingers club, who let me in, they thought of it. I sent them a copy of the book, and they never wrote back. I have a feeling they didn't care for it. They came out not terrifically well.
Based on what you just said, you've made me think of the part of the Venn diagram where NPR listeners and swingers overlap. And
they do.
Wow.
They totally do. As I say in the book, the swingers who go to swingers clubs tend to be suburban doctors, lawyers, professionals, exactly the kind of people who listen to NPR. I'm pleased to say that, or I guess I'm alarmed to say, no one at the Swingers Party recognized me. I use my own name. Hi, I'm Peter, but nobody knew who I was.
Of all the Vice people you met, where did you get the most recognition? Who was able to tell, I don't know, by your voice or if you used your name?
Very few of them. Very few of them. It never happened. It really didn't. Nina Hartley professed to listen to my show and enjoy it, the porn star, but nobody else really cared.
And she also professes to discuss Nietzsche at length, doesn't she?
Yes, she could, though.
Oh.
Don't sell her short, is what I'm saying. That woman is bright.
Yeah, well, I'm saying if she can discuss Nietzsche,
Yeah,
she probably can
She's
discuss
definitely
Wait, Don't Tell Me, sure.
No, it was also kind of fun, because a lot of places I went, nobody had any idea who the hell I was, and that's fine. Remember, the NPR demographic is loyal but small, as you know, as a public radio guy. And here's the thing, if they don't listen to public radio, they have no idea who you are. I mean, we don't sort of seep into the rest of the culture the way that TV does.
So really what you're telling me is go on TV.
Yeah, basically. I mean, the example I use is Desperate Housewives. I've never watched a minute of Desperate Housewives in my life, but I could tell you who the cast is. I could tell you what the main storylines are. I could tell you the network it's on. I could probably even think of its producer, because it's a TV-saturated culture. People talk about it all the time. If you're in public radio, if they don't know who you are, if they don't listen to you, they don't know who you are, because no one else talks about it.
People don't learn about NPR stuff via osmosis in the same way that you learn about Desperate Housewives.
They're not doing stories about us on the E! channel.
Now, when you were writing the book, how much did you feel like you had to write in a wisecracking Peter Sagal-y way that would be recognizable, or did you?
Well, I didn't want to be recognizable. I wanted to be funny. I wanted to write a book of humorous nonfiction. And there are a lot of people who do that who I really admire, and I really wanted to be like that. I mean, there are a number of people. Ian Fraser, his book, The Great Plains, is one of my favorites. I take it down and read it all the time. Nicholson Baker, to a certain extent. David Foster Wallace, who I think is just brilliant. And who also wrote brilliantly on the porn industry, which was sort of in my mind.
He comes up on the show a whole lot for some reason.
Well, he's a terrific writer of nonfiction. In fact, maybe even one of the best there is. And so I think it's a noble calling to write amusing but true and interesting nonfiction. So I didn't go after it with a sense of like obligation. I went after it with a sense of challenge, and I won't suggest how well I did. At the same time, I do feel an obligation to the people who. Let me put it this way: I don't think anybody would be interested in a very serious, meditation on mortality from me. And I think that the people who came to my book because they knew me in the radio show, and if that's what they got, I think there's a good chance they'd be a little disappointed. Did you
ever happen to get any advice on funny experiential journalism from the frequent panelist and humorist and blurber of your book, P.J. O'Rourke?
I did and I didn't. I mean, PJ, I've read his books, and I should have mentioned him on my list a moment ago because he's somebody else I tremendously admire. But, I did get very specific and very useful advice from Roy Blunt Jr., who also is on that list, I should say, who's a brilliant writer of nonfiction and funnier than I'll ever be. My main contribution that those guys made is just taking me seriously as a writer. If you're sitting around and talking about writing with P.J. O'Rourke and Roy Blunt and Charlie Pierce and Tom Bodette, then you're a writer, damn it, just by the sense of your company. And that was tremendous. But Roy actually was the one who gave me very specific and pointed advice. I sent him an early version of the chapter on my visit to the set of the pornographic TV show. And he basically sent it back, and he said, there's not enough of you in it. I mean, otherwise, this is all stuff I've read before. Why would I care again? The only reason I care again is that you're there. And that really became my mantra for writing the book, because I had been afraid of that in the sense that, who the hell am I? My topic is what's funny. My observations what's funny. My experiences, not so much. But I began to see that Roy was correct. I mean, whatever pathetic excuse I am to read a book, I'm the only one. I mean, there's no reason to read this book unless you're interested in me and what my point of view is. And therefore, I had to offer that. And that really became sort of a significant thing.
Now, since we only have a couple minutes left on today's show, I want to ask you this. What do you think separates you from the Vice people you meet? Why aren't you eating the $800 dinners regularly? Why aren't you swinging?
Well, I think I can answer those questions separately. I think that, one of the reasons I'm not eating the $800, well, actually, no, I think it's the same answer both ways. Nina Hartley, who aforementioned porn star, said to me that people's orientations, as in sexual orientations, go far deeper than the usual assumption. People usually mean gay or straight. But they actually instead of just being two-dimensional, they're four-dimensional or eight-dimensional. They're gay with a penchant for exhibitionism and group sex, but not bondage, or whatever it may be, or, in other people's cases they're straight, but with a predilection toward monogamy, which I think would be mine. And if you have that orientation, you can't change it. And you would be as unhappy trying to live differently as anybody else, as a gay man trying to be straight or a straight person trying to be gay. I mean, the point being that you are who you are. You know, I walked around, for example, the Power Exchange, the sex club in San Francisco, and all these people were doing all these things. And they were having a wonderful time. None of them were things that I wanted to do. I didn't look at them and say, wow, I wish I could dress up that way and flap around. No. Wish I could be whipped by that woman. No. Just, And I just think that's the same thing. And I think even when it comes to any of these things, I think you have to be wired that way. I mean, if I could become a foodie, I think, with a little more application and a lot more money. I think if there's anything, weirdly, that I could really get into, it'd be that. I've been hanging out with restaurant people and wine people and just enjoying it no end. But that's about it, I think.
I have a feeling we public radio guys are kind of susceptible to foodieism if we don't keep our guard up. The book, once again, is The Book of Vice, Very Naughty Things and How to Do Them. Peter Sagal, thanks so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Colin. Pleasure to be here.
For more on Peter Sagal and The Book of Vice, visit petersagal.com. Our music is composed by Ben Althouse. Check out his website, Ben Althouse, that's BenAlthouse.com. For more information and our online show archive, visit colinmarshallradio.com.